I think she also saw something in me that I didn't see in myself at that time.
Mm,
But that I guess is like, I was not afraid to be different. I was not afraid to be unconventional. I think she harnessed that in me enough that when she passed, I think that was when I really want to try.
does that carry over in how you mentor others?
That's a good question. I think it's one of those things I also use a multi lens when I mentor my neurodivergent mentees because I realized that some of them they ask me for mentorship because of what I've achieved, but then they realize what I had sacrificed.
You're listening to the Brave OT podcast with me, Carlin Neek. This podcast is all about empowering occupational therapists to step up, level up, blaze some trails, and maybe engage in a little conscious rebellion in service of our profession, our clients, our work, our businesses, and living our mission wholeheartedly. We are all about keeping it real, doing hard things, unhustling, being curious, exploring, growing through our challenges, and finding joy, fulfillment, and vitality as we do so. Really, we're OTing ourselves and each other. I hope you love this episode. Hey, Brave OTs. Carlin Neek here. I'm an OT who helps OT practice owners internationally through coaching, mentorship, and community support to help you thrive without the hustle. And I'm recording this from Calgary, where I was born and have spent most of my life. This land, with its mountains and rolling hills, foothills, prairies, and its Chinook winds and persistent sun, sits within the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation. I acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who've lived in relationship with this land for thousands of years and continue to call it home. I'm learning what it means to be a respectful settler in this place. Today, I'm talking with Bill Wong. He is an occupational therapist from the United States, currently working in home health. He's a TEDx speaker, a TEDx event organizer, and someone who I must say has really been doing some of the most interesting work in our profession when it comes to getting OT into rooms and onto stages that it's never been before. Bill has a way of thinking about career development that I found genuinely refreshing, strategic, intentional, neurodiversity affirming, and grounded in a real understanding of what it costs to show up differently in a profession that feels really brave. If you've ever felt like OT is healthcare's best kept secret or wondered what it would look like if we stopped waiting for an invitation and started creating our own opportunities, this conversation is for you. Bill Wong, I am very excited to welcome you onto the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. So let's begin.
Let's begin. I first encountered you in Facebook groups, and you do a lot of engaging with people in these Facebook groups. You've got this passion that you really want to encourage OTs to advocate for a profession and engage in organizing TED Talks and TED events, I should say. And I also loved that I got to meet you in person at both the Canadian OT conference and the Australian OT conference in the last few months. And I got to learn a little bit more about the human who has lots of interests and is really dynamic. And so, is it all right if we start by talking about who you are and what you care about? What you
Sure,
do?
I'm going to talk about that. Since I know there's a global audience, I definitely talk about my background. I've been in OT for almost 13 years. I know next month is my 13th anniversary as an OT. I worked briefly in pediatrics to start off in about a few months. And then I tried a failed experience in terms of doing private practice for almost a year. And
You
then,
said it's a failed experience? It
yeah,
didn't.
failed experience in terms of private practice.
Okay.
And then I was in skilled nursing facility or nursing home. I know in some parts of the world they call it aged care setting for almost 9 years. And then now I'm doing home care for a little over 2 years. And I also teach acting on the side at Stanford University in the States for a little over 6 years. So
Okay.
the part is that I was in the OTA program or the occupational therapy assistant program for a year, and then I transitioned to the Master of Occupational Therapy program since COVID. So
Oh,
there's that part. And then, oh yeah, a little bit about myself too. So another the OT side of me is that I also have been active in the profession, mostly in our national association in the States. So at first I was involved in a small group, grassroots group. That was since the call sunsetted, which is disbanded as yes, in a sense, in layman terms. It's
Yeah.
called Community of Leaders Group, where I got my feet wet and started serving my national association. And then I served in the Representative Assembly, which is like a OT parliament, a senate, so to speak. I served in that body for 3 years from 2017 to 2020 for my
Okay.
state of California. And then I also served 2 years after that on the Volunteer Leadership Development Committee for our National Association. Before now, I transitioned to my current role as one of the co-facilitators for the AOTA Autism Community Practice Group. So yeah,
Okay.
I've been in that role for a little over 3 years. That is the extent of my leadership involvement. And then
Can I ask just a quick question? So
oh,
the
yeah,
autism community of practice, is that for autistic OTs or is that for OTs working with clients with autism?
so that part is more on a group of autistic and neurotypical OT students and practitioners who are interested in learning more about best practices, anything around autism.
Okay.
Well, the topics for our monthly discussions are usually group members. They have a lot of input from group members. So pretty much it's one of those things. It's not like, okay, I suggest these things should be on the agenda.
Yeah.
Actually, our members, we have a lot of input on what they want to see on the agenda as well.
Great.
Yeah,
And
I would say it's almost like a small practice club. I don't know, maybe back in the days, like, I know on Twitter, on X, we have a group that is called OTalk, right? With a bunch of OT students and practitioners from the UK and
yeah.
occasionally from others outside of the UK, like myself, would join and we would talk about different topics. So it's like that kind of nature, so to speak.
So you've been working in these committees, in these leadership types of roles, in addition to having a full job. So there's this passion to contribute beyond your OT practice.
Yes, I think that was instilled in me by a couple factors.
Yeah.
I think one is that the school that I studied at was University of Southern California, and definitely it has some notable leadership in AOTA presence in recent years. So including our current AOTA president, Arame Emarisade, and a decade ago, Florence Clark. Definitely a pretty rich pedigree in terms of leadership in OT, so to speak. So I think that is probably one of the factors. And of course, I also like to mention that also we also have a pretty long line of our state president, which has pretty strong USC ties as well. So I think that is probably, oh yeah, and another factor is that it is also a school that always touts its current students, its faculty, and alumni when it comes to presenting at our state conference, AOTA conference, as well as the World Federation conference. So I think
Gotcha.
one of the things is the pedigree of the school.
Yeah.
I think that's one factor. And then the second factor is actually my late mentor, my first mentor in terms of professional development outside of my school. Her name was Terry Olivas de la O. For those of you who don't know who she is, she actually, oh, sorry, no, she was because she passed away, sorry. Passed away 11 years ago. She actually was highlighted in Karen Jacobs' Lego lecture back in 2012 with her work in terms of her work in anti-bullying for school-age children, as well as empowering Latino youth.
Right.
So she actually did a lot of community work when she was alive. And I also know that her daughter is also currently an occupational therapy assistant. So,
Okay.
but I would say it's definitely Tara's impact. I would say since she passed away in early 2014, I think that it was my personal mission in trying to honor her in my own ways because I recognize that I am Asian. I am no means a Latina. So there is no way that it's like, okay, there's no way I can replicate that stuff. And then
Yeah.
in terms of anti-bullying, I was like, yes, for me as somebody who was hazed in my childhood, I can definitely resonate with that. But my professional work, I was like, that didn't really align, so to speak.
Yeah.
Oh, but then the first thing I remember what Terry did for me was very memorable in my experience. And that was actually just about a month before I passed my boards.
Mm.
So I was thinking that experience is very important to share because it's going to tie to the context of the conversation. That time, I barely started my post-professional OTD at that time at USC as well. So I think it was about a month into my program as a student in that program. At that time, I remember Terry actually arranged me to go on to a local radio station to do
Ah.
a local, like a public radio interview. And I remember that she actually coached me up to prepare me for that interview. And she actually told me things about like, okay, there are some things that you might be okay to say in an OT conference context or within OT or within allied health. That's totally okay. But then when you go on like a public radio setting or a public media setting, it actually would not be okay. So
Mhm.
that's that part. And of course, that was also the year that Karen Jacobs did her Slagle a few months before as well. So that was that part. So yeah, I remember that experience. I think it was I don't know what happened to that episode.
Mm.
I would say that was a very powerful experience in terms of understanding, in terms of advocating for OT in public media from a
Right.
personal level. I definitely have experienced that. And I also remember during Terry's mentorship, she also highlighted the importance of connecting with people outside of allied health, outside of OT, so to speak. And then I remember she showed her connections with a local politician around her, and
Yeah.
then also her connections with, I guess it's like local public media. I forgot what TV station it is, but I know it's one of the local TV news networks, as
Mm.
well as she showcased her connections with, I think is the one of the banks. Yeah, so she showcased that with me, and she said, and then of course she also showcased. I also got to volunteer at that event I talked about where it empowered Latino youth for 1 year. And I definitely was aware of who sponsored her events.
Mm.
So therefore, it was that part that I was like, okay, that is something that I might be able to do when
Mm.
she passed. But of course, at that time, I did not envision that I would do what I'm doing now.
But
Uh,
there was those seeds were planted with that intention to help OT be visible outside of OT. And I find that it's OTs are so comfortable talking about OT within our profession because there's that sense of they don't understand it out there. But that's why we need to get out there. That's why we need to be talking more about our impact with non-OTs.
Oh yeah, I think it's one of those things that, of course, at that time she also realized my talents before taking on me as a mentee. I realized that time because
Mm.
at that time it's like, okay, she knew I had some strength with social media, but of course not as good as it is now. Knew that I have some potential in that regard. I think she also saw something in me that I didn't see in myself at that time.
Mm.
Was that I guess was like I was not afraid to be different. I was not afraid to be unconventional. I think she harnessed that in me enough that when she passed, I think that was when I really want to try.
Does that carry over in how you mentor others?
That's a good question. I think it's one of those things I also use a multi-lens when I mentor my neurodivergent mentees because I realized that some of them they ask me for mentorship because of what I've achieved. But then when they realize what I had sacrificed to get there, they'll be like, whoa, that's a pretty big gap.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big gap to get there. And so therefore it was one of those things that I remember when Terry did with me was that she met me where I was at
Mm.
that time. So therefore I try to meet those mentees where they were at that time. But of course, being neurodivergent, one of the things that I would doubly point out is that I know one of the things that Terry actually asked me a question when we first met in person was like, what did I ultimately want to achieve?
Mm.
And actually, I brought that question over to my mentees because I was thinking from a neurodivergent lens, you know what? Sometimes these people, they need some concrete information in terms of how to get from point A to point B. I know some of my mentees, they says, oh, I want to get involved in research. I want to knock on that door. And then I said to them, I was like, okay, what are your strengths? What are
Mm.
your weaknesses? And sometimes some of them said to me is, oh, my biggest weakness is actually networking. And then so I said, okay, it's almost like, it's not sarcastically, but just concretely speaking, I told them there is going to be a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
The fact that is, it will involve stuff that you might not be as good at, or you might have to compromise. You might really have to invest in yourself.
Yeah.
Because one of those things is, okay, it's almost this conundrum I told them is like, look, for me, I'm a networker, so I definitely understand the value of face-to-face conversations.
Yeah.
And sometimes these face-to-face conversations are much more valuable than say you message them on social media or you email them a dozen, 2 dozen times. So,
Definitely.
so that's the reason why I told them. And then of course I also told them is like these people they frequent at conferences. So therefore it's one of those things is okay. From a sensory standpoint, it might not be very friendly, so to speak. And then
Yeah.
I also know that hey, you might have to do a lot of masking.
Mm.
But it's one of those things. It's like, look, are you willing to pay the price?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing. It's the thing. That's one of those things. I remember that was actually when I mentioned to Carrie about my own personal goals.
Yeah.
I know she actually had this reaction on me. She was like, "What? A soon-to-be new grad usually don't have these kind of audacious goals like this." Right. For example, like I know it's very popular in the States. Oh yeah, so talk about being a roster fellow, have that recognition, roster fellow award recognition from AOTA.
Okay.
I know when I mentioned that to Terry, she was like, "What? Not many new grads think that way." Or just new grads think that way. It's like, and then she also told me is like, she actually asked me some follow-up questions like, okay, based on what you understand about this particular award, like, how do you think you will get there? For me, I was safe for somebody who has not practiced yet at that time because I think it was about a couple months before I finished my final placement. Actually, she was surprised by how composed an answer I gave. So she was like, okay, considering that you are a soon-to-be new grad, that was a very impressive answer. So it's like, you know what? I is yes, the steps you identified might be very big, but then it's like, okay, then it's my job as a mentor to help break it down a little bit easier for you into some smaller steps
Right.
for you to get there. It's almost one of those things that she saw in me as okay, I see that you have passion, you probably have some talent, but you also are very raw in terms of leadership. One of those things is that, so she said to me, is okay, during my mentorship review, I would like to fine tune your skills, like both your soft skills and your hard skills. You need to be,
Yeah.
I read that. And I said, okay, I'm ready for the challenge. I'm ready for whatever you throw at me.
Do
Yeah,
you think can I ask in there there's a quality or way of thinking that you're identifying is different for you than a lot of people who in your position or in your position at that time, but that sense of having a big audacious goal. Can you identify what kind of is different in your thought process around that, that is sometimes missing that you'd love to instill in someone who isn't quite making audacious enough goals or not ready to
that's a
not
good,
feeling ready? It's a bit of
that's
an
a,
abstract question.
that's a good question. Actually, I can really answer that.
Okay.
So for me, I would say since seventh grade, since I came here from the States in sixth grade, I would say the thing that I'm very passionate about is trying to develop a resilience about me. Because I
Mhm.
guess at that time, I'm also a sports fan. At that time, of course, it's like instead of following soccer, I got acclimated to different American sports like football, golf, basketball,
Yeah.
I believe. Yeah, so I think basketball, football, golf, baseball. I guess it's one of those things is I don't know. There's this internal researcher mind in me. I was trying to figure out like why are some of these athletes who are like in the Hall of Fame in their respective sports, and then the difference between them and what they call the Hall of Very Good, which are athletes with very good careers,
Mhm.
but they fall short of the Hall of Fame. And then, of course, there's another tier, what they call the journeyman, which are like, okay, folks who are barely getting by, even though they also have a lot of talents themselves.
Yeah.
So I try to find myself as, okay, what is the DNA at that time? Of course, as a seventh grader, I didn't
Why
really
not?
have the time to, I didn't really have that sophisticated thought process at the time to think about, okay, what is the common denominator?
Yeah. What kind of what causes a person? What characteristics do they have that help them be the type of person that moves to that next level that drives for that?
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, okay, I do. It's one of those things. I see these. I guess it's like I watch a lot of sports, so it's like see a lot of these careers. Of like, okay, they're very strong careers, but they fall short of the Hall of Fame. That's why I mentioned about the Hall of Very Good adjective earlier.
Yeah.
So I was like, what is the difference?
Because it's not all talent, right? Like it's not all just the tangible skill. There's something internal that's driving them to go for it, right?
Of course, of course, there's luck, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Sometimes
There's
it's
that.
luck factor, right? So sometimes it's like, okay, you are at the right place at the right time. So
Yep.
they're okay, you know what? It's like you achieve success at the right time, so to speak. And then there's also a line I realized that okay, these athletes seems to be like they have a lot of resilience, they have a lot of grit. Not that they're all very good don't, but they also have the talent to match, and they also have very good work ethics too. I think it's one of these kind of factors, some combinations, some in the DNA that I sort of realized that okay, I would say at that time when I started OT school on day one,
Yeah.
I remember you know what, this is a great place to have a great jump start.
Mhm.
But I also realized that a jump start means nothing if I don't put in the work to grow my career. I think that is something that I learned, especially considering that OT is my second chance at a career. I think it's one of those things I learned from that.
So in your journey, you recognize that sense of building resilience and being in the right place at the right time, like getting out there, putting yourself out there. So you're in lots of places. You're driving your career with this knowledge that there is an opportunity for it to be bigger, for to go to the next level by doing it, by
Oh
engaging and
yeah,
having
and
some
then
resilience.
I also think about Shark Tank because I also watched quite a bit of Shark Tank. Oh, you guys in Canada, it's Dragon's Den.
Dragon's Den, yep, yep, here.
I
And in
definitely
the
that
UK,
was
it's Dragon's Den too.
so I definitely watch those shows as well. So I
Yeah.
definitely seen some pitfalls, I guess, in some businesses. It's like one of the common problems I see, I guess, in that kind of show is like some businesses, they started small, they got
Mhm.
very successful, but then they had a feeling of, oh, it's like, crap, I am now, it's too big. I need
Yeah.
some help. I'm
Totally.
big, I need some help, so to speak. So actually, I thought about this. I thought about this even before I was a new grad. I was like, okay, if I become big, if of course that was a pipe dream at the time, what would I do to constantly evolve? So in a sense, I would say is that I definitely treat my career like a business to speak.
Yep.
Oh yeah, another influence I forgot also to mention. Back in undergrad, I had a very bad habit, but turned out to be a habit just in time that became a very good habit. Like really, it was a good experience. I would say not a good habit, but a good experience. So actually, I played a lot of poker in my undergrad days
Good
because
to you.
the year I actually started playing poker, it was the year that Queen's Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. It was the year of the poker boom. So one of the things that I guess because I was such a math nerd at the time, I definitely study a lot about strategies and other intricacies that typically my roommates will not study. So
Yeah.
I think one of the things I learned from that game is about risk taking. I would say is
Calculated risk taking,
very, very
based on
risk
statistical
taking,
understanding.
risk taking, game theory, so to speak. So I would say, and then of course, I was very fortunate also in undergrad. I took a course in microeconomics, and my favorite concept is about opportunity costs. So I definitely, I would say, for me, in terms of my professional development, since I became an OT, it was definitely about weighing about opportunity costs in terms of whether I should pursue it and whether I should not pursue it. So I think that for me is that because of my undergrad experiences, I think that is also one of the factors in terms of helping me become a little bit more bold. It's one of those
Right.
things that it's I think one of the things that I see with my decision making in some
Yeah.
of my career, I realize that almost like a poker player, they
Mhm.
make a play that sometimes people would not expect them to make. Like for example, like, okay, they would bluff at a spot that people would not expect them to bluff or it's highly unlikely to bluff. Or sometimes they will make a bet that is like, okay, they actually got paid off more than typically would, so to speak. So I was thinking that like some of my career decisions are in line of this kind of thinking.
This is so good and exciting. I'm hearing so much entrepreneurial and innovative thinking in like all of the thought processes that you've put into actually not just that, but it's the intentionality behind your choices in your career development. And I'm teaching a course at the U of A on entrepreneurship as a pathway to innovation and creating fulfilling careers and things like that. And we actually did a bear's den. I called it a bear's den pitch, the adaptation on the dragon's den, mainly just to help get the OTs thinking about entrepreneurial pursuits and solving problems out there and choosing innovative pathways. And there's so much great science behind this way of thinking, right? And it really is a scientific process of exploring, making a calculated risk, gathering information from that, allowing that information to inform our future choices. And in doing so, we're building confidence that some of this works out and that there's also an element of some of it doesn't work out, and that's to be expected.
Oh yeah, and of course, ironically, as an undergrad, I think people would find it very surprising. When I play poker, my roommates would consider me as probably the most conservative player at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things of they probably see me as okay, there's this mathematical guy. He would typically would not make too many mistakes, would beat himself. That's one of those things that is okay. And then they also know that I am a lot more selective than they are.
Yeah.
So they was like, "What?" I was like, "What is okay, this guy just simply play good hands." And then that was when I realized that, okay, yes, so to understand the conservative thinking, being
Mhm.
a professional in that regard, because I was like, okay, this mimics my poker playing style in my undergrad. But then I also thought about like how top poker players win. Look at even like this year's World Series of Poker. It was like I would say, yeah, that player who won this year, as man, he is very relentless, but very smart and very aggressive at the right time. It is one of those things. I was like, that is the kind of thinking that I want to emulate in my professional career. Because all of those things that I guess in my sense is that okay, I only have one career
Yeah.
I want to make it count. So therefore, I said, you know what? I better make some of these decisions a little bit bolder because I guess and also I realized that youth is an asset because okay, it's like when I'm young, sometimes I have a lot more energy than when I'm old. And I definitely do not I guess one of those things is that I guess probably my working experience in a nursing home setting or the elderly setting really kicks in is that you know what? I do not want to be a grumpy old man. I do not want to be living with regret later in my life. So
Mm,
that's the reason why I'm like, you know what? If there are things that I can go for it, I will go for it.
go for it. Yeah. You're not only betting on a sure thing. You're making more things happen by making some bold moves, trying some things, and in doing so, having some really unique experiences. You've really crafted an interesting way of going about things. And I see you going to all these events. I saw you in person at two, but I know you just came from a TED event, a sports one, right?
Yes, correct.
How was that?
Oh my god, those were yeah, it's 600 attendees, but I think that it was one of those things that I guess because I was involved in TEDx so much,
Yeah.
and then I knew the inner circles in terms of who were involved in the project, I probably had a better sense than most that it's gonna be really good. I had a better sense, I have a better hunch than most. So it's one of those things I think is that a lot of our profession, they may not be in that quote unquote inner circle. So therefore, it's one of those things is that it's okay, it's just a tech conference. It's
Yeah.
a very expensive conference. And then it seems like it's for the super rich. It's like, why the hell I should be there? I think a lot of people they
You have a big conference savings account somewhere that allows you to go to all of these things. It is expensive. It's good to acknowledge that.
it is. It is very expensive. I
Yeah.
think one of those things is that because I have a go for it mentality, I think it's one of those things is that I realized I think earlier I mentioned about like youth as an asset. I realized that okay, there are certain things that it's better to do when it is younger part of my career, when I'm energetic, versus if I'm like 70, 80 years old, I might not be as energetic. That will be a little bit of a challenge.
Sure.
That'll be a little bit of a challenge in terms of doing these kind of things. Not that I can't if I'm
Yeah,
speaking. I'm not, I'm very far away from that right now.
you are.
Also, like, okay, if I'm doing that kind of traveling that I do right now at an older age, it would beat up my body a lot more.
Mm,
So I also understand that part. And then also realize that as we talk about investing in the future,
yep.
sometimes it's important to pave the way for the future, even if you are not going on that path at that time, because you never know. It's almost like some people they build disaster shelters.
Yeah.
That kind of thinking. I was like, okay, not that I'm preparing for disaster, but
Yep.
that's, you know what, is what if I have to pivot in my career? What if I have to pivot? And at least it's like, okay, maybe then I have a little bit easier time, so to speak, in terms of pivoting, because at least I have some connection in place. Maybe my odds of making my next transition is going to be a little bit easier.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. So you go to all these things. This is how you're investing in your future. You're building connections, you're opening your thinking, you're making brave moves, and this will serve you. This will inevitably serve you in your whole career, in your
Oh,
life.
yeah, I should go back to the conference. We didn't talk about how was it actually. So I would say it was very surreal. I would say, I think that I got the attendee list because I registered a week before I attended.
Okay.
And then I just scrolled through for like maybe a minute or two about who would be there. I was like, man, I felt like I was a kid walking in a candy store. Because of like a lot of the not only notable athletes, but also a lot of top executives from different professional and amateur sports leagues. And then, of course, there are also people who work in different aspects of the sports industry as well.
Okay.
So it's one of those things is that, and then of course I look at is, are there anybody from an OT background there? Nope, that is me is it.
Mm.
So that was why I was like, why the heck OT does not know this. And I
Mm.
was thinking about, okay, perhaps it's because I'm on the inside and then the rest of the profession are on the outside. So therefore, it's one of those things, it's one of those, as there's a saying, right? It's like, you don't know what you miss out on until you experience something.
But what do you want OTs to know about this stuff? What do they need to understand? Why do they need to understand this?
I think a little bit that backtrack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's one of those things is that I think it's one of those things is like sometimes as outside looking in,
Yeah.
will I know even I talk to some people on social media about this. Well, they only look at the price, they only look at the type of people who will be there. Tell them like, ah, these are the super rich, the affluent. Like, why would they listen to somebody who is in the middle class, lower middle class? You know? It's like,
Healthcare provider. Yeah.
or like, why would they? Why would they? It's one of those things that's like, from a social economic kind of standpoint, it's like, it doesn't really compute. It doesn't really compute, so to speak. There is that barrier too. And then, of course, the cost. Oh, yeah. And then another thing that like spooked them sometimes is that for each of these tech conferences, you actually have to apply before you're able to register.
Okay.
So it's one of those things of like, that feels like a, I think I posted on LinkedIn. Some people might feel that it's like a private country club in golf. I kind of see, I was like, Why is it not open to everybody?
Right. A privileged experience.
Oh yeah, privileged experience on top of the pricing. On
Yeah.
top of the pricing. And then of course there's a lot of things too because of typical frontline healthcare practitioners. It's about I think in Canada you guys call it CPD. States we call it the continuing education units. The fact that is these continuing education units are not awarded, especially for that level of investment.
In Canada, we can count any sort of anything that meets any learning opportunity or enrichment opportunity. We can count them, which is
Oh yeah,
great.
that's great. But I know that yeah, I guess you just have to spend a little bit more time
Yes,
to justify why.
totally.
The that would be the hard part.
Indeed.
One of those things is that okay, if you cannot claim those, then it's like, why do we have to be there? Oh,
Sure. Yeah.
why do we have to be there? I think it's one of those things is like because I heard typical budget for many OT practitioners in the States is okay, maybe a few $100 or $1,000. And then there's the thing is okay, this thing is like 1,000, 2,000, $3,000 on the cheaper end. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are we like trading a small vacation for this? It's like some people are like, okay, I need my own work, rest, and play. Why do I have to think about investing on behalf of the profession?
Sure.
All those things is like, I think that is something that they do not compute with that. I think it's
Fair enough. I can see
and
why people wouldn't.
And then another thing I think that some people they probably don't understand is the flow of the conference.
Okay.
Because okay, yes, we have some learning components with the talks and stuff. So I think we have about 1 to 2 sessions a day, which are about maybe about an hour and a half long. So you probably listen to about maybe 5, 6 different presentations,
Mm,
so to speak, and then you actually get to interact with the speakers and whatever it is. But I think a lot of it is that you get experiences that a typical average person might not be able to get. So I think one of those things I probably highlighted on LinkedIn was about I actually get to hear a talk from like a workshop by a Super Bowl winning kicker before we actually go on to a local pro football field in the Lucas Oil Stadium. We actually got to kick some field goals at the
oh,
stadium.
fun.
That was fun.
That's neat.
Also
Yeah.
heard and then there was another experience is about going to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and they actually get to have experience being part of the pit crew. So for
Oh,
people who
neat.
are into racing,
Yeah.
I think this is actually a very cool experience to do that under pressure.
That would be.
So it's one of those things.
So
So
it's a really dynamic, like lots of unique experiences built in, not just about going and listening to some talks.
and then there's also, I think there's another experience on the second day is actually hear the backstory about the Hoosiers film because it's although Indiana is very famous for basketball.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's that part.
Yeah.
And also, I also got to hear a panel that is also everybody would attend. So it's about women athletes and mental health. That's a pretty interesting panel I
That
found.
would be.
And then another interesting panel I found is about advancing women in sports. I think given the way the sports world is, this is going to be an important social political issue. So to
Yeah.
say. And of course, right now, I also know that I think because it's a first year event, there are some issues that they got a little bit more conservative because they
Mm,
want to feel the temperature of the room before
sure.
they think about, okay, should we go further in certain directions? Well, I think that all in all, I will say there were definitely some topics that I think that if OT knew how big a deal it was, I think that more would have been willing to make the investments to come.
To be an attendee. Is that what?
Correct. Yes, because of the fact that it's like at a tech conference, at a big tech conference, it's a long shot for us
Yeah.
to get a spot to speak. So compared to a TEDx event in locally, so I would say definitely one of those things because I also realized that a lot of OTs they have a mindset of, oh, I go to a conference, I want to speak, but then you go to a conference like this, what are my chances of speaking? It's
Yeah.
probably almost none.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things. I mean, you can speak, but it's more like okay, you can speak during a breakout to share your perspective, but it's definitely not the same as speaking on stage. It's
Right.
not the same. It's not the same. So it's one of those things. I think that is why But then also think that, of course, in my sense, because as a casual sports fan, I think it's pretty cool to actually meet and talk and take pictures with some sports heroes that I know about and some sports hero that I didn't know about until the event. I thought
Yeah.
it was a pretty cool experience in itself. So
Yeah.
I thought that is, I think it's one of those things is that, yes, I pay that much. So therefore now it's like, I'm going to think about what is considered value in that context from a traditional OT conference context. I actually worked very hard to find that. And then, oh yeah, another thing I also want to share. Sorry, it's a little bit disorganized here.
That's fine.
But I also think that a lot of people in the OT community, they sometimes cannot distinguish the difference between a TEDx event and a tech conference. One of them is about, okay, of course, obvious the factor is cost. So TEDx event, you talk about maybe anywhere from free to like about a $250 range.
Hmm.
Talk about US dollars, okay? I'm talking about US dollars versus like a tech conference. You talk about the cheapest is probably about $900
Wow.
all the way to 10, five figures,
Yeah.
five figures. So if
Wow.
one of those things is, yeah, it's a pretty big range. But I guess one of those things that people don't really see is that there's a reason why they actually justified the price increase because of the fact that aside from the experience I talked about, also the quality of the production. I will say some of the local TEDx events, I might see maybe one, two cameras, people working backstage. And then that one is, oh yeah, there is a room of people working backstage with
Yeah.
a lot fancier equipment. And then you also have to think about, okay, the spaces they are utilizing, right? So we talk about the Lucas Oil Stadium, that's a pro football stadium. We have to have access to the Gainbridge Fieldhouse, which is where the Indiana Fever and the Indiana Pacers play their home games. And then also, of course, I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, even have access to the airport for one of the dinners, and then also the billboard, the amount of promotion within the airport.
Yeah.
Compared to the promotion when AOTA was in town a decade ago versus that one I did
Yeah.
last week. It's like, yeah, it's like it is nothing compared to when AOTA was in town a decade
Bigger budget for
a
sure.
decade ago.
Yeah.
So therefore, even based on my estimate, I would say this project in itself, I would not be surprised is at least $2 to $5 million to put it all together.
Wow.
Yeah, so therefore I
Huge.
was, yeah, that is a huge project in OT terms. I think it's one of those things is like, because I guess for me as an organizer, oh yeah, I also forgot to mention, they also have food trucks who come for 2 days.
Wow. Yeah.
That then attendees can get their expenses for free, and so the dining experiences that is also included as well. So there's
Yeah.
a little miscellaneous parts. That was why I come up with the figures. Even I would say maybe a $2 to $5 million figure that might even be conservative.
Right. Yeah.
Not how expensive it is, because of all of those things is that it really does stand out from a TEDx event. This is one of those things that's like, I know another thing I also want to talk about. I know I may be tangent a little bit, is that I've been keeping tabs with a friend of mine who is also a test event licensee from Taiwan. And she is actually trying to put together a TED conference about AI in Asia.
Oh,
One of the
interesting.
things that we actually talked about over the last few weeks is okay, is this is the TED conference that we are trying to put on here. We cannot make certain aspect amateurish. It's like it got to be top of the best in terms
Yeah.
of quality wise is concerned. So it's one of those things. Is like one of the things she told me before I came last week. It was like, please highlight stuff that are considered growing pains from this event because one of those things is okay. These are the growing pains that I want this event to avoid. Yeah, I think it's one of those things is that many people in OT they don't see that because they are not inside the mind of this kind of thinking.
No, they just don't have that awareness.
No, it's a
Or just
really it is. It's just one of those things like, yeah, I think it's almost like when I explain that level of thinking, sometimes people were like, man, it's like your thinking is like 10 levels, 50 levels beyond what we typically think. I was like, that is like, how can you think that many levels deeper than that? I said, it's all these years organizing TEDx events, and then of course, I guess it's a blessing and a curse with my own TEDx events is that I have a very small team. So therefore, I had to do a lot of legwork myself. And in the
Yeah.
process of doing a lot of legwork myself, I do a lot of homework. And in the process of doing a lot of homework, that's why I spot a lot of these things that a typical person would not see.
Yeah, and you've built those experiences. And it's interesting because your call to action often is that OTs need to organize TEDx events, right? And so I often look at that and go, wow, I would love to give a talk, but the thought of putting all of that effort into organizing something is not where my strengths lie. But of course, you learn as you go. But I'm curious about when you make that recommendation to OTs, what's behind that? What's behind that recommendation?
Okay, so one, I actually have to reference back to Karen Jacob lecture
Yeah.
because I remember her cooperation is about, oh, OT should share their stories through club media. But then and then of course I also have to put some context of when she made that point because it was actually 4 months before the first OT TEDx talk was premiered. And I don't think Karen knew at that time either.
Oh,
I don't think Karen knew at that time either. I
yeah.
believe it was by Denise Rotherd, and she did it at an event in South Dakota.
Okay.
And then, of course, at that time, I think that being on public media is already a pretty huge goal, so to speak. And then I think it's one of those things is that, and then, of course, what sort of set it off was in 2017, when people knew about that I'll be on stage the second time, people were asking me my secrets. Like, how do I get on it? How
Yeah.
come I got on 2 times in less than 5 years of practice? And then there are some legends in the field, like, oh, they don't even have the shots yet.
Yeah.
And they still don't. So it's one of those things that's okay. So I think in late 2017, I took it upon myself, was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna be a lab rat and trying to figure out like what's the secrets behind it.
Mhm.
So actually I guess one of my mantras, my own leadership is being willing to take one for the team. So I said, okay, I'm going to try to find out what is it like from an organizer's point of view. And boy, it really overwhelmed me. There were lots of moments where I was facing a lot of deer in the headlights moments. I was like, wow, I actually didn't know that. Wow, this is harder than I thought it was.
Yeah.
So I remember my first event, I was like, wow, I actually made a lot of mistakes. And I actually did quite a bit of things that were actually considered no-nos.
Oh, no.
No, at that time,
Yeah.
in retrospect, I actually broke a few rules. I'm glad that nobody talked about it, but it's nonetheless like,
Yeah.
then I was like, oh crap, I actually broke a few rules
Yeah.
that I'm not supposed to. And
And the world
but
didn't fall
then
apart.
yeah, but then I was like, you know what? At that time before COVID, actually, I thought, you know what? This is too hard. I cannot do this. I don't have finances. I don't have manpower. It's
Right.
too much for my neurodivergent brain, which we call
Right.
divergent. It's too much.
Yeah.
So I was like, I think that 2 months before COVID, that was when when I uploaded the final video from my first event, I was like, I quit. This is too hard, which is understandable. I definitely have seen some events that were one and done, including the event that I spoke at for my second time. That event actually ended up being one and done as well.
Okay.
It was one of those things that was like, yeah. So at that time, I think that feeling was definitely very understandable. But COVID hit at that time is okay. Relatively speaking, I actually was still pretty, I guess I was not as connected to that community as now, but nonetheless, it's like because I was seeking for help so much, I was like, you know what? I was very help, so I actually connect to that communities. I mean, like the TEDx licensee community on Facebook. And so when COVID hit, there were actually events that were saying like, hey, we are running this remote event. We would like you to come support the event.
Okay.
We would like to come and support the event as an attendee. So I was like, okay, you know what? At that time, I was just curious about how these remote event works. At that
Yeah.
time, I was not very committing. I was not committing to doing these events again. I was not, but I was just curious. And then I think that I guess it's like one of the things I was really amazed about was that some teams can bounce back so fast. We talk about maybe less than a month when COVID was announced, and then they pivot and then they can put up together an online events within a month after COVID.
Yeah,
That is very impressive.
that is. Yeah.
That is very impressive. And then I think, and then also within 6 months, I also saw some evolution of these remote events, how they have evolved in
Yeah.
terms of audience experiences just within 6 months. Okay, it went from, okay, you're showing a pre-recorded recording of all the talks, so to speak, to, okay, using Zoom, using other video conferencing platforms and make it pretty interactive. I was like, and then of course, I also got exposed to different license types that
Yeah.
I've seen as well. So it's almost like I got to travel around the world within my own cell phone or with my own computer. Just
That's
because
really exciting. Big
yeah.
shift.
Yeah, so it's almost I remember I think it's like I was such a geek. I think that I went to about a dozen of these remote events before I realized like, hey, you know what? It's like sometimes you teach people about body mechanics, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how to lift things. I realized that, man, you know, it's like I have the brains, I have the talents. It's just that the way I approach it was a little stupid. I thought it was like I was stupid in that I was like, okay, knowing that I have limited resources, I was like, you know what? Some events they can still do with little to no resources, you know? So
Mhm.
I was like, okay. So then I asked, of course, I like the researcher brain in me. I guess it's like at that time I was more mature. So I just did content analysis, field observations kind of study informally in my head. I
Yeah.
was I was like, why can these people pull it off, but I can't? You know? Why? And then of course I know partly it's because of the team factor, but I also thought about, okay, you know what? Sometimes keep it simple, stupid is more than okay. And not wrong because of all of those things of, hey, I think that was when I realized some of the objectives that I'm now going by when I run these events. One is to have fun because one of those things is, yes, I know it takes a lot of servant leadership, but at the end of the day, if I don't have fun, it's like it will show so many ways in these events. I see that. And then two is that, okay, it's sort of like an accommodation for myself as well. So it's
Mhm.
almost like balancing my passion, but I also understand my limitations, so to speak. So there's that part of the equation. So I remember during COVID, I've been telling people like, hey, we gotta try this, we gotta try this, we gotta try this. But people are like, we're so burned out in practice. Why do we have how do we even have bandwidth to do something like this?
For
You know?
sure.
Yeah, so there's that part of the equation. So yeah, I think that was how like, but then I guess because I had a failed experience in my mind, so
Yeah.
that, ironically, I got to like that became a blessing in disguise because of the fact that okay, I realized that I just need to believe in myself a little bit more. So that's why it's like I was able to do this because I was able to believe in myself and just pull through.
All of that resilience that, those foundations of working on resilience and learning about resilience and learning about how the people who do things in that sort of next realm where you talked about with the athletes, right? There's the hall of
Fame, Hall of Fame,
yeah, Hall of Fame, but then before that there was the Hall of Pretty Good.
very
No,
good.
very good, yes. And so that all of those things, I see that in there, right? Because they all had failures to get to where they were. They weren't just betting on the sure thing. They were persisting and falling down and persisting and trying again and putting themselves in other places. And that's what I'm hearing too, that resilience of you having that first experience where you were ready to pack it in and never reapproach. But then, okay, there was a new in and a new learning and a new understanding. And how could you have been great at it your first time? And
Right.
let's do this again. I love
Right,
it.
and then oh, yeah, so as a there's a second half of the question on the strategy part too,
Yeah.
because I also saw a lot of pictures on social media from a lot of our academics going to local colleges, community fairs to talk about promoting OT in that kind of context.
Yeah.
So actually, the context is why are we going out to recruit people into the profession? Instead, why don't we bring people in to come to check out our profession?
Yeah.
So the reason why I'm saying that is because hey, some of our programs, they have like stuff that are not portable. Think about our physical agent modalities device or any kind of assistive technology device. It's
Mhm.
like, how hard would it be if we were to transport it to a local college career fair or local high school career fair? Think about that from a logistics standpoint, right?
Mhm.
But if we are like, okay, you know what? We set up like we do sometimes for fun activities within our department that for our students to experience, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, maybe we can reuse some of these activities for in OT school or OT assistant school, and then just have to tailor it to a public audience in that regard. So why are we not bringing these people to us to check out OT in the process? And then that part. And then, of course, I know about now since I've been licensee for 7 years, is like, why are we relying on the general public who might not know what we do to give us those opportunities to share our knowledge or our passions and that program? Why are still relying on something that is unreliable?
So you're suggesting we need to create the stage.
Correct. We need it's like there's a metaphor, right? It's like right now, I think there's a metaphor that says like right now, I think most of OTs, we are like somebody who's hungry, and then somebody give us a fish to eat,
Mhm.
right? A piece of fish to eat. What I want OT to learn is learning how to fish so that we
Yeah.
can be self-sufficient.
Yes.
I think that is the kind of thinking. I think that it seems simple, but then I think that when people realize the work involved, they're like, wow, it's actually really not that simple. Even though I also would say our curriculums do prepare us for this. Because I
Yes.
remember it's one of those things is like, I think our curriculums, most of our curriculums talk about community programming development, working groups, right? In mental health, something like this. And then there's research, ethics. I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, in our clinical work, we are very used to working with multidisciplinary teams. We're used to that. So it's like, how come and then, of course, we also claim that we are creative.
Yes.
So how come we are not translating these traits into something like this? I understand, hey, there could be some stuff that be a little bit nuanced, no? Understand some stuff like about lighting, aspect about film production, stage design, all these kind of things. So I think a lot of OTs, they look at this like, man, there's like all these technical stuff we have to learn. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? That is, we don't have time to learn. We don't have
That's
time to learn.
definitely what goes through my mind when I see your posts. I love your passion, but then I think, "Oh gosh, there's like me and my executive function, my type of neurodivergence is in the executive functioning part, right?" And so it's like the thought of doing all that feels overwhelming, but I love the premise here is that essentially so people go to TED and TEDx events because they want to be inspired to think differently. They want to be sort of like shift perspective on things and be open to these kind of novel ways of thinking that translate to other things. And so there's already this openness. And for our OT thinking to show up, not in a general, hey, OT is awesome. Here, let me sell you on our whole profession, but rather, here's a snippet, and that's OT. Here's another snippet, that's OT. And it's exciting and going to an open audience. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Oh yeah, and then also, of course, I know in AOTA we just launched our Vision 2030.
Okay.
So some of these social political issues that we talked about, like
Mhm.
justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or like AI, or I'm trying to think what else, gender equality, some of these things, right? And then climate change and sustainability. I know in the Canada and UBC, they just have a curriculum in that realm, you know? So like, hey, these are the very social political issues that we talk about OT all the time.
All the
So
time.
why are we not showcasing ourselves as a player in such a space in a public way? So it's
Mhm.
one of those things is like I know a lot of people like I think one of the trends I also see in OT is that our reach it's a little bit limited sometimes. We talk about the right things like, oh, we want to showcase ourselves on social media more, or we want to showcase ourselves, we want to increase our presence. But I find that there is a disconnect is that it's like if we have a very small crowd to begin with,
And it's mostly filled with OTs.
uh, or even just our immediate circle, family and
Mhm.
friends, right?
Yeah.
And then so it's like it seems ideal that we use these mediums, but then it's like if our reach are very small, then it's like we are just shouting very soft in a Grand Canyon. Nobody was gonna hear us. One of those things is okay. That is why I know that's why my mentor's thinking got into come into play. Because of
Yeah.
one of those things I realized that okay, in order to OT to get a little bit louder, we need allies. We need allies. And that's the reason I went to the sports event last week because I realized that, hey, there could be some opportunities for some allyship. So it's one of those things. I know one of the presentations, it was by, I believe, Tamika Catchings and let's see, I believe Dr. Alison Barber. So they did a presentation about empowering teen girls or young youth and adolescent girls into having a more equal playing field to participate in women's sports. And they also address stuff like mental health and stuff. I was like, hey, this is right down OT's alley.
Yeah.
Stuff like this is occupational justice, is mental health. At least these two things, it's like, hey, I definitely should be connecting with them. I'm glad that I did to be there to say, hey, you know what? And then I remember in the presentation, they also mentioned about, okay, they definitely want their home base to be in Indianapolis because that's where they are locally. And then they also mentioned in the presentation, talk about, hey, in the future, we're trying to expand to four other locations in the United States.
Mhm.
I told them when I was taking a picture with them, I said, hey, if you guys ever think about LA, I am definitely willing to be your ally. Just something like that.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
so it's one of those things that's like, why is OT not thinking that way? Especially particularly something that could be potentially win-win. Because I'm also thinking about something like this, right? Especially in the states, we have many entry-level doctorate and post-professional doctorate programs. It's
Mhm.
like, hey, that can be doctoral capstone experiences right there
Yeah.
right there, it on the spot. So that was why I also made a criticism to our custom coordinators. It's like, why? It's like, dude, I understand it's expensive, but hey, you might need to show up next year for your students.
Yep.
Especially considering that there are more and more capstone ideas about sports coming up. I think it's one of those things that's like, you don't do it for yourself, but you always do it to your students. That you should build these pathways, even if they are non-traditional. Even if you might not have a shot to get in, at least I would like that you try.
Do you know, I am actually thinking I've been plotting and planning to create another podcast that's actually not OT facing. So I've been thinking about these things too and wanting to get into kind of more engaging and speaking outside of OT about some of our ways of thinking, not so much to sell OT, but to actually bring the richness of what we have to offer into helping other people. And I'm really excited about these possibilities. And I'm really excited about you doing this work. And I'm really grateful that you persist and really advocate in the way you do too, and encourage our profession to look outside more.
Oh yeah, I think that will need to look outside more. I think I really think so because of the fact that is I think it's one of those things of like I think before I went last year, the feeling I had it was like okay, there's this seemingly invisible wall.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like there's seemingly this wall, and then how hard is it for me to break open this wall? I guess that was a question I asked myself before last year.
Mm,
And now I saw the two experiences in, I actually realized that it's surprisingly easy to open once we get over the fear of, okay, this is so expensive. So it's
yeah.
one of those things, it's actually easier than I think it is. Because I realized that like, yeah, I was surprised. Like some of the new connections I made last week, like for example, one I was connected with one of the hosts, and she actually is involved in doing a lot of TV broadcasting with Indiana State Sports, Pro Sports
Yep.
last week. And then I know that is that one. And then, like, of course, these athletes, I know I also connected with two Olympians, current Olympians on my LinkedIn network. And then also definitely different CEOs and executives from different sports industries, like different sports sector. I actually found it very surprisingly easy to connect with them. Yeah, because
You
of the
put
fact,
yourself in the right room.
yeah, I was there.
Yeah, you were there. That was the
I was
key.
there. That was
Yeah,
there. That was it.
yeah,
Oh, so that was one of those. And then, of course, I also know my stories. I know some people like, why the heck I'm there? I work in home health. None of my patients are athletes. So,
right.
like, why the heck I'm there? And then I sort of like, and then we realized that, oh, my backstory is that, oh, actually, no, none of my family members, they have any connections to the sports world. Like my family, they're just teachers, local elementary school teachers
Yeah,
or teachers aides in local education. And then my sister's an architect, but then she's not really out there with these kind of people. So
yeah.
it's one of those things that from a social capital standpoint, I would say I would consider myself a rags to riches kind of story because of the fact that it's like I really start from nothing. And then now I'm there in this kind of environment where I actually get to have be in a company not only with affluent people, but now also with, have them as some of them as my friends. I find it very
Yeah.
incredible that I can be there at that time for those 3 days.
And it takes, yeah, that initial step. I can tell you a really relatable story. So my husband is a big hockey fan, loves hockey, and has always loved Wayne Gretzky. He was his favorite from when he was a small, barely could walk child. And when we would talk about our bucket list, the things that we'd really love to do in our lifetime, he only had one thing, and it was to go to this Wayne Gretzky fantasy camp. And I wanted to live with the kids abroad. I wanted to go do all of these things. I had quite a few things on my list, and he had this one thing. And the year my dad died, there was like, I don't know, 20 or $30,000 of life insurance money that we got. And I thought, okay, we could put that on our mortgage or we could do some renos to our house. But really, we wanted to create some memories and experiences. So me and the kids went and lived in Peru for 5 weeks at one point, and my husband came for half, and my mom came for a half, and that was my side of it. And for him, we went to the Gretzky Fantasy Camp the one time, and my husband did a lot on social media, and so the one of the organizers came up to him and said, "Hey, we have this NHL network wants to follow somebody around, put a mic on them, one of the campers, and because you really like to do a lot on social media, we thought that maybe you might be willing to be mic'd up for because they end up playing hockey. Like it's a hockey tournament with all of his idols, hockey idols and stuff. And so he said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And so he got to have this sort of enriched experience where his whole experience was documented and some of it was published. And we built these relationships, and people kept saying, "Oh, when you come back next year." And we're thinking, we can't afford to come back next year. That's crazy. This was like the once in a lifetime spend on this expensive thing. And then my husband got invited back several more times for free actually because he was a goalie and he was good at networking within these events and making it a positive experience. So we went back a few more times and got to enjoy this experience, and he got to build these layers of relationships where he's friends with a lot of these people who he looked up to, and will text when they're in town or if their flight is stuck somewhere or something like that. And it's been like our kids have worked at the Gretzky hockey schools, and like it's just like this bizarre experience from him putting himself out there and doing this interesting thing. There was an initial investment, but also met with a willingness to build relationships and network and enrich the experience where it's just kept on paying off. It's been a good return on investment.
Yeah, it's one of those things too. I think it's one of those things that I also know that I'm a little bit, I got a little, I would say my conference experiences, when I go to so many conferences in OT,
Yeah.
it actually trained me a lot my stamina.
Yeah.
Because like it's actually very underrated because I know at the tech conferences that I talked about,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I think it's one of those things is like you probably want to participate fully
Yeah.
because otherwise it's like you are not going to get a good full return on investment.
And that really is exhausting. Like, it's overstimulating. Like, we neurodivergent people, like, it's just all the senses. Yes.
Oh, yeah, and then there's 600 people in the same room, 900 people in the same room that you may not know about. And then, like, yeah, it's crazy sometimes. Like, for example, I know one of the connections I made from TEDx last year. I met this person who was on Forbes 30 under 30 list in 2023. Her name is Maya Penn. I would say after I commented the video where I contributed for her at that event as well.
Yeah.
So she followed me on Instagram. And then I happened to find out that she'll be in town in a couple weeks. And when I messaged her, I was like, hey, I would like to support your show, even though I know it's late, even though I don't live as close, like about an hour away. But I said, you know what? I would be willing to go on my way to meet her at a weeknight,
Yeah.
to support her show. And she was like, okay, great. Would like to meet you again. That was crazy.
That's
See, just a
awesome.
little, just that little bitty thing that is like, oh yeah, just willing to put myself out there. I think it's one of those things is that, but of course, I also know to go back to the mentoring piece. If I were to mentor a neurodivergent mentee and they see my kind of schedule, I
Mm.
say, okay, don't go so big. We want, I would say, is if they want the goals to be on networking, I said, okay, let's just do one step at a time.
Yeah.
Because I will say, for me, I actually told them straight. It's like my conference routine is like no breaks, all festivities, all festivities, 3, 4 days in a row. I do like that. If that's not you, I don't want to force you to be me. I don't want
No.
that
Yeah.
because that is not neurodivergent affirming.
No, it isn't.
It's not. So therefore, I was thinking that okay, in order to get there, I need to get. It's one of those. The way I phrase it is that I want to build on your stamina.
Mm.
And then I also want you to build on your skills in terms of like how to socialize in this kind of environment because it's very different. It's like some social skills that is like, okay, in social skills is like, okay, when we do one to one, we can take our time sometimes, but not too much.
Yeah.
But in and then of course interruption sometimes is considered as rude. But then in a conference environment, sometimes you have to interrupt to get
For sure.
people's attention.
For
Especially
sure.
if it's your idols or your friend and stuff
Yeah.
to say
It
hi.
was it was so interesting to when I had at the CAOT conference this year, I got a booth for the podcast because I figured that could be an interesting way to invite people in to engage by creating space for people to come and say hello. They're interested in podcast. It's not about selling anything. It's about curiosity and what that's all about. Or maybe some people have listened to the podcast. They want to come say hello. But I loved how many neurodivergent OTs came and sat down and unmasked, and that was really it felt special. It felt really neat to create safe spaces where we could slow down and maybe get out of the busyness of it all and just have a conversation or just sit and rest for a minute, and that was felt really special to me.
Yeah, I think it's versus like when I was at that tech conference last week,
Yeah.
I realized that I got to switch my game in terms of social skills because like
Mm.
when I was in line for the speaker meet and greet, I
Yeah.
realized that okay, I only got 30 minutes and I got maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 lines that I would need to go to.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things of like, okay, I just introduce myself, but then I need to quickly jump to my point. That is not that easy to do. So it's one
No.
of those things that's like if I were to mentor my neurodivergent mentees, because I know one of them, they said, I've observed them because I brought them to the USC alumni reception, I think it was last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I observed them more, okay, they just talk to the same person for about maybe 30, 45 minutes. They don't actually bounce around.
Right.
I would say one of those things is I remember I gave the feedback to the mentee is yes, I know. I know what I say to you might not sound very neurodivergent affirming. But I also have to say, remind you of your goals here. It's your networking goals that you talked about in the very beginning. It's one of those things is like, hey, in order for you to achieve this goal a little bit better, you got to know how to bounce off from one conversation to another conversation, while also keeping an eye on who might be walking by or around you.
Yeah.
That was one of those things. I was like, I remember that mentee told me is, wow, so much awareness that we have to do in this kind of environment. I said, yeah, this is how you maximize your experience. I understand sometimes quality is greater than quantity,
Yeah.
but in some senses, like you want to do a little bit better on the quantity department while not sacrificing so much on the quality of the experience. That's
Yes.
the hard part that I remember I taught them and T about that. And they were like, wow. because they also watched me in action too. Because we were actually doing our sensory strategy, right? So like we were doing a walkthrough around the venue to find
Yep.
some possible spots to calm down and stuff. And I remember that was the day before AOTA. Because I use that strategy sometimes to actually like, you know what? I know I typically don't get overwhelmed, but just in case I do, I have some
Where are you going to
strategies.
go? Exactly.
I'm gonna go. But then it's like we were talking, we were walking, and then they noticed I was like, oh, I saw somebody I recognized. And I talk. And then I do that again. I do that again.
Yeah.
Do that again. And then they were like, this is crazy how you do this.
How do
I
you?
said,
Yeah.
"How you
Take
do it?
practice.
How you
Yeah.
do this?" I said, "It's one of the things that I sort of told them too. It's like if more people know who you are, it's one of those things that you got. It's a trait that you gotta develop second nature, so to speak. You cannot really be in tunnel vision when
It's
you're
true.
out there. You cannot because one of those things is once you're in tunnel vision, you might miss out on things.
I remember so when we were in Australia, I you presented with a group of neurodivergent OTs and we're talking about student experiences of neurodivergence or something along those lines. And then there was a Q&A and you were coming off stage and you noticed I was there and you came up to me and you were waiting. I knew you had something to say. And then you said, Patricia wanted us to get a selfie. And you took a selfie of us and that was it. But it gave us an opportunity to message a little bit later. Oh, share the video, share this photo. And it's planted a seed for continued connection. And in a really not time consuming way, you just seized the opportunity that popped up for
Yeah.
connection.
I guess it's one of those things is that because I go to conferences so many times,
Yeah.
so I sort of know the routine. And I feel that is the same way in terms of going to these tech conferences. It's all those things like, yes, on one hand, you have more time for meaningful conversations because conference is designed that way.
Yes.
It's designed that way. But at the same time, you still should do quite a bit of networking. So that's
Yeah.
why sometimes I use social media as an assist sometimes too. Because
Super smart.
yeah, sometimes when they make posts, I say, "Hey, I follow you on LinkedIn, and let's have a chat a little bit." Some
Absolutely.
so
That's
sometimes
really
a lot of those things is like, yeah, now I'm using that as like a adaptive device to help
yeah.
me to recognize some faces. I think that because at that environment too, unlike OT conferences, I mean, in OT conferences, I definitely can recognize some faces already. Easy, it's easy for me because like I see some of the same people who go there almost all the time, at least once a year at particular conferences. So I was like, okay, I definitely cannot. Like it's hard to miss those people.
Indeed.
Versus like at that environment last week,
Yeah.
so I probably only recognized maybe a few people because I
Right.
saw the faces on Facebook. I talked to them quite a bit online also. So sometimes it's like, okay, I think at that conference, if I'm correct, I probably might only recognize maybe about less than a half a dozen people out of 600.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's one of those things is like when some of the attendees said, "Oh, they were here earlier." I was like, "What? I don't recognize the faces." There's all those things is like, if I knew, I would have approached a little differently. So that was a little bit different experience, that's
A
for sure.
little bit different.
Yeah. So
Well,
it's
Bill,
almost as they say, we don't have yeah, it's almost like instead of in OT conferences, I felt like I'm in a home game
yeah,
hockey versus like at a tech conference now, still is I'm still at the away game.
an away game. That's a good analogy. Yes, totally. Bill, we could talk on and on. I feel like we need to record ten episodes, but we should wrap it up here. May I ask you my last couple of questions I ask everybody on the podcast? What does being brave mean to you?
I think being brave is, I think earlier I alluded to, is
Mhm.
not being afraid to be unconventional, not afraid to be bold, and not afraid to try.
Yes. And you know what? And I love that you shared when there sometimes that things didn't work out, right? Because in trying, we do have attempts, we have failures, we have attempts where we're learning, right? And I really appreciate you sharing that because some people are afraid to try because they're afraid to fail. And so I so appreciate you sharing what you've learned from those first attempts. What is something brave you've done recently?
What is something brave I recently? That's a good question. I want to take a moment to digest that.
Please take all the time you need.
You know what? I think last week definitely there were a few moments. I think that was.
Yeah.
So I know one of them, right? As a casual football fan, I think it's pretty surreal to actually meet NFL executive who was a former NFL player, Troy Vincent, and to talk to him. And not only that, I took a picture of him, but of course I also took a picture with his wife.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. That was
That's great. So
interesting,
you
you know.
took some courage to go up to this
Oh,
person.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course, because, as a casual football fan, and then I'm up close and personal with an league executive, of all people.
That's
That
exciting.
that is exciting, and trying to
Yeah.
else. Oh, yeah, of course. I think for me as still sometimes a little bit shy with girls. So,
Okay.
also, I believe later on that evening, so I actually took a picture with the cheerleaders on the Pacers and the Colts. That was a really interesting experience because I know that, hey, that is pretty surreal experience to be with them take a picture with me like this. For me I still am a shy guy sometimes. So for
Yeah.
me to approach these women
Yeah. Good
and
for you.
with them to do something like this, that was something that is like definitely I would say definitely is like time of like my life for sure.
I love that. That's very brave. Thank you for sharing that. What is something you would like to see OTs be a little bit more brave about?
I think earlier in this conversation we talked about having OT community to organize more TEDx events.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I know a lot of people, they talk to me about when I make these comments in person, they said they are a little bit nervous about putting public media content, particularly in areas that they might not have as much expertise, because that is also required and part of I guess part of the job description as a TEDx event licensee. Because even if you are not directly coaching the speaker, you still have to sign off on it. And signing off on these things before they actually get premiered on stage and then eventually uploaded online. Yeah, that takes courage because all those things. Some people when they hear about, oh, so I cannot have an all OT event or an all LI health event. I said, you can't. It's like you gotta to be comfortable with different topics. And they're like, man, especially now with Trump and stuff, it's like
Yeah.
with the anti-diversity, equity, inclusion stuff. So it's
Yeah.
all those things is like if any academic sometimes some academics have told me is like they are not that easy in terms of putting out public media content on justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, just
Sure.
because of what's happening. And then, of course, they also have some fears in terms of with an event like this, especially if it is associated with a university, they're like, man, I do not want to make my university look bad.
Mm,
Because of the fact
right.
that it's like, hey, this is public facing. This is not an OT like USC. They have their own occupational science symposium. It's not that type of event. If you talk about
Mm.
these events, they face the public, so to
Yeah.
speak. So sometimes they can be a little bit nervous about this.
Understandably. Yeah. Yeah. I that's great. I appreciate that. And last question. If anybody is feeling particularly inspired and interested to connect with you, how would you like them to find you? Where
Also,
would you like them to find you?
LinkedIn is fine. I think LinkedIn is
LinkedIn?
fine because I know that LinkedIn. I think they have a lot more follow limits than say Facebook
Right.
or even Instagram. I think even Instagram has its limits too. I think Instagram is like 70 on 500 people. So it's one of those things of like, when my Instagram's filled, I'm like, hey, I can follow more people. I think LinkedIn, you can have a lot more than that. Which is
Okay. Great. I'll put your LinkedIn profile link in the show notes.
right.
Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate you being here, and I feel lucky to be connected and network with you, and I look forward to the next time we run into each other at a conference or
All
maybe a
right.
TED event.
All right. See ya.
See you. Something I really connected with in this conversation was Bill's metaphor about teaching OTs to fish. This idea that we've been waiting to be invited onto stages, waiting for the general public to hand us opportunities to talk about what we do. And what Bill's really saying is we don't have to wait. We can create the stage. We can show up in rooms where OT hasn't been, build the connections, and start representing our profession in spaces that are way outside of our bubble. It takes a kind of courage that I think OTs have, but we don't always know how to act on. Be sure to find Bill on LinkedIn. I'll have his link in the show notes. He's one of the most generous networkers I've met, and he absolutely practices what he preaches. If today's conversation stirred something in you, that feeling of wanting to do something bolder in your career, but not quite knowing where to start, I want you to know that's exactly what we work through in the Activate Vitality program. It's a community of occupational therapy practice owners who support each other in building sustainable, values aligned businesses that help us work in ways we really want to work. We have group coaching calls, an online community, an ACT based framework for building entrepreneurial and psychological flexibility, and one on one support. It's not about hustling harder, it's about getting clear on what matters to you and building a practice that serves your life instead of taking it over. If you'd like to learn more, head to balanceworks.online/AV program to book a clarity call. No pressure, just a real conversation about whether this community might be right for you. Thanks so much for being a part of the Brave OT community. And as always, be brave OTs.